Today on In the Squadron, Sloth, Warren, and myself, we got to sit down with Lieutenant General retired Daniel Fig Leaf. He used to be the Vice Commander of U.S. Space Command and the Deputy Commander of U.S. Pacific Command. Let's join the conversation. I have the Wikipedia one. And I didn't
let me send me an email to send you the civilian bio because it's a lot more diverse than the years.
And I'll try to make sure I include that in the description underneath.
If you include one thing, I am inordinately proud of the fact that I received the Oslo Forum's first ever peace writing.
I heard. That was good.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a paper that influenced national policy, I think. So I'm proud of that.
Good. Awesome. So I guess we'll just start in on the conversation itself. How do you like to be addressed, sir?
Fig.
Fig? That'll work. Remember, Fig, Sloth, and of all things, Warren.
That's Warren, sir. That's a good one.
I'm going to have to Google that movie to figure out why they call it Warren.
And I'm just Lieutenant Dan.
And why is that?
I showed up at my first operational squadron as a second lieutenant, as a C-130 navigator, and then went to refresher, also still as a second lieutenant, only by a few days. And then my family history does go all the way back to the Battle of Bunker Hill and the Mayflower. That man up there is James Harvey Thayer. He's actually buried over in Marion, Georgia. He was with the 12th Wisconsin.
Cheesehead.
Yep. He'd just shown up to the area that's now known as the Wisconsin Dells and volunteered. And, unfortunately, got hit by a sniper's bullet in the Battle of Atlanta, and it took him 4 or 5 months to die of infection.
Yeah.
So.
Are you familiar with Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain from the Battle of Gettysburg?
No.
He commanded the 20th Maine. It's one of the great stories of American soldiers. And he was a college professor before that. He received 2 medals of honor, not for the Battle of Gettysburg. He later was the governor of Maine. And he died at like 90-something years old in the early 20th century. But it says he died of his wounds. He was wounded in the Civil War in India, and I think an Indian engagement. But, 50 years later, he died of his wounds.
Lead poisoning.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so here we are in the squadron on a Friday. It's actually a Friday, folks, so this is real and legitimate. So,
It really is. Fig, it's great to have you here. So we've been discussing with the resurgent China, especially with your time spanning through the rise of China, and now we get into where it's one of the largest economies in the world. How has your thinking on China changed, and really what should the U.S. approach towards China be?
So is it a resurgent China? Not really, because all of their fantasies about the glorious past of China are made up. Okay, there's not a lot of truth in China.
Okay.
Fake news is, if there's a religion, there might be fake news, because they go so far, the Chinese government goes so far as to bury fake artifacts in the South China Sea to legitimize their illegitimate claims to the 9-dash line and the territorial waters that they claim. So the history isn't that great. I'm not disrespecting China, I'm just saying the facts are it isn't that great. Wasn't unified that long, and wasn't very glorious, and wasn't as powerful as they'd like to claim. The Great Wall's an interesting artifact, but the history even of that is very complex. So it's a new China, a different China, a different force, if you will.
So not so much resurgent, but this is new China.
And so I don't know what the correct word, emergent, it's the new China. And it's different, and it should concern us all. The United States, by and large, made possible the emergence of the new China because we were such a moderating force in the Indo-Asia-Pacific, in particular in Northeast and Southeast Asia. We didn't go nuts in Korea. We didn't cross the Yalu. They still entered the war, and call it the war against U.S. aggression. I think the Chinese were actually legitimately concerned about, not about losing their buffer or about protecting the North Korean people, They concerned about incursions into Chinese territory. We didn't go so far in Vietnam as to get the Chinese directly involved. Okay, so that was pretty moderate even in times of big wars. Because we were able to provide our strategic umbrella to South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, those three states did not nuclearize.
Okay.
And so China didn't have to worry about that. And we promoted, though we didn't call it that then, exactly what we're promoting now, a free and open Indo-Asia Pacific that allowed the emergence of the Chinese economy. So the U.S. is good for China. I don't think any of the officials I know in China would tell you the U.S. is good for China. Where are we now? They've emerged. Their population has experienced a dramatic improvement in their quality of life. Not universal, but
Yep.
generally, people in China are significantly better off. Doesn't include the Uyghurs, the Muslim minority. And all that happened during, decades of sort of softening of the communist ideology and some reasonableness from Chinese leaders. Not perfect. That's an airplane. I like it.
I love it.
But now we're in yet a different place, and I think since the 19th Party Congress in late 2017, there's been a real shift, and it's not a good shift.
Okay.
And that is the Maoification, if you will, of Xi Jinping, the president.
What do you mean by Maoification?
They've deified him.
Okay.
They've entrenched him in power, removed term limits. He's very significantly consolidated power and authority in ways that are pretty repressive.
So
by
it'd be
US
almost a
standards.
parallel to Kim Jong-il and the way North Korea.
Now, that's
body
a
their
that's a
leader, or is that
complex. Yeah, it's more the way Mao was
Okay.
venerated and deified,
Okay.
despite all the things that Mao did. And I happened to be in Beijing in August of 2017 before the Party Congress, and I've traveled there many times and worked with and talked to official and unofficial Chinese leaders.
Okay.
And there was a very significant shift in how they even spoke about Mao.
Mm-hmm.
And frankly, they didn't for the first many years that I dealt with the Chinese. They didn't talk about him because it wasn't that great. We're trying to forget how many million people died and some of his frailties and oddities.
Yep.
But they don't, in meetings like those that I attend, they don't talk about anything accidentally. It's not, what do you think about Mao? I had a dream about Mao last night. We've been told to talk about Mao, and I'm going to talk about Mao, and I have my talking points. And so I heard, I think, 3 of the participants in the conference I was at speak glowingly of Mao. And glowingly is not quite, they spoke positively about it.
Okay.
And it was so striking. I came back and I talked to people about what I heard. I said, stand by. Because the fact that they are sort of bringing Mao back into discussion has a meaning, and it's probably that they're going to Maoify Xi Jinping. Sure enough, they did. Next Party Congress, they changed their term. What does that all mean? This is a Friday conversation in the squadron, so I can meander all I want, but let me get to the point. What it means to me is, for the foreseeable future, the U.S. cannot influence China. That's a very significant shift from what I thought a year ago. And it's just all of the evidence tells me that we ought to engage with them, we ought to negotiate with them, we ought to try to encourage behavior within international norms with the Chinese, because those are all the right things to do, but they're not going to work.
Okay.
So as we do all those right things, we also have to not confront China, but complicate things and put impediments to unfettered pursuit of their goals, because their goals aren't good. Their goals include a very different world order that is not rule of law based, it isn't principle, that serves China and really nobody else. And if you look at Chinese government and commercial involvement around the world, what should concern us is how self-centered, selfish, self-serving Chinese actions are. And that's what, fortunately for us, fortunately for the world, that's what makes them not a very endearing partner in any domain, commercial, military, diplomatic, is they're about Chinese perceived interests and not anybody else's. So we should seek to complicate things through insistence on fair trade, which they don't like, through our partnerships, which they don't like, by being a better partner than they are, just by being present in regions, particularly the Indo-Asia Pacific. They don't like that, and when we partner and live up to our principles and our values and what we say we believe in, we're a much more attractive partner than China. So everything we can do that gives them issues will restrain their action. And we got to do that.
Yep.
So that's the bottom line, Lieutenant Dan. The bottom line is we can't influence them right now. They're not influenceable. So we have to introduce impediments to their unfettered action.
Complicate their trade.
Complicate everything.
Complicate the new Silk Road. Things of that nature.
Complicate the growth of Huawei by cutting them out of the 5G business.
Okay. Awesome.
That sounds not very optimistic. I think it's just realistic.
Well, that's what we're looking for. I know, Eric, you had a question earlier.
Well, actually, I have a new question.
A new question. Okay, let's go with that one.
On that thought, sir, the idea that they're uninfluenceable for at least a short-term foreseeable future, what sort of event might precipitate a change in that?
100 years in dramatically different leadership. So,
Okay.
let me take the Chinese long view and say, I don't think it's going to change anytime soon. I'm trying to be realistic, not pessimistic. But the next big change in China will likely come from a significant shift in economic circumstances.
Okay.
And I don't know how that'll play out. And what I mean by that is, at some point, the Chinese economy is going to cease its remarkable growth.
Yep.
And it's going to have a negative impact on millions and millions and millions of Chinese who have got expectations far beyond what they had before, and they're not going to be happy about that.
Yep.
And how that plays out will be the next China.
So I'm going to roll with another one. Eric, being a space and missile guy, myself being a space advocate, even though I'm a C-130 airlifter and your background in space, how important is the U.S. taking the lead in space to complicating China?
I'm not sure it's a great place to complicate China, but our role is the most responsible actor in space.
Okay.
It's critical, and in treaties and laws and our conduct in the space domain, we are far more responsible than the Chinese. Thank you for shooting down that SC-19, I think it was, the satellite they shot down. We should have made a much bigger deal of that because we're more responsible. So we're the leader on space policy, though we're pilloried by China and Russia because we haven't adopted certain codicils. It's very analogous to the UN Convention of Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, as it's known. We have not ratified it because we're a democracy and the politicians fight over it. We've never gotten to the point where we could ratify and thus sign the Young Convention on Law of the Sea, but we follow it. We're probably the most compliant nation in the world of UNCLOS, even though we haven't ratified.
Yep.
And the least compliant, probably China, who has ratified.
Yeah.
So I'm not, I think space is truly the most shared domain because of its nature. It's over everybody.
Yep.
And you can put boundaries in the maritime domain. You just can't put boundaries in space other than, how far into space you're going. So
It's more Sun Tzu's precipitous heights. It's the next high ground.
yeah, the highest of high grounds, the least divisible of high grounds, and something that is of broad benefit to populations, rich and poor, everywhere. So I don't want to make space a battleground. We have to protect our access and our capabilities. But man, I think it is truly different and special, and the U.S. responsible leadership on space law and policy is our most important role.
Okay. Eric and I had been talking about multi-domain ops earlier, so this may actually pull right into it, space being a domain and cyber being a domain as well. You got a good question
Oh,
for
yeah,
that one?
yeah. So, sir, with the increased focus the Air Force has put upon multi-domain ops, in fact, one of the eSchool members is actually going to be one of the first graduates in the 13 Oscar career field. How do you see, from your experience in Space Command, where do you see multi-domain ops fitting into the daily lexicon of airmen going forward?
I'm always skeptical. Okay, I'm still a lieutenant at heart. I'm glad my last rank was lieutenant general because it still had my favorite part of it. And I'm always skeptical of things that become things. Buzzwords, lexicon-based change. And I'll include multi-domain in that, not because it isn't important, but it's so freaking obvious. It is so obvious that it shouldn't take an AFSC or a speech by the chief, who I've flown combat with and have tremendous respect for it, to make it a thing. Okay. I never flew a combat mission where I didn't rely on space capabilities. Okay. GPS and space-based information. I never flew a combat mission where there wasn't a joint element. And it may have been airplanes in the air domain from the Navy and the Air Force Reserve and the Air National Guard and from our NATO coalition partners in Operation Allied Force. But there's still that's a domain to the different componency of participants. We relied heavily on the electromagnetic spectrum, not just from space and with GPS, but from Intel, SIGINT, everything. So, yeah, of course you've got to be able to leverage capabilities across many domains, and so it's so obvious to me. I don't think it should be a thing.
So I'm just trying to piece it together in my head. So it's almost like joint, if we use that as an example. Joint was just an obvious thing. We just had to start doing it. We didn't make a joint officer.
Well, we did, and it was law, and that was a little more difficult. It took Goldwater Nichols and all that, and came out of a joint failure.
But we didn't make a specific career field of you are a joint officer.
You're right. We made joint certified officers,
Right.
which is part of my skepticism, because I taught air power related topics at the Army Command and General Staff College, but didn't get joint credit for it. And other people who did things that were absolutely unjoint got credit because of the arbitrary classification that you get from an AFSC or a certification. That's why that's a big part of my skepticism is
I can understand. I did 3 years with the 10th Mountain Division, but I'm
Yeah.
not a joint officer.
Exactly. So what, it gets a resounding whatever from me. But that doesn't mean it's not important.
Yeah.
I think having a sense of the different domains and the interaction of capabilities and threats from those domains is really important. I just, I don't
Okay.
click like on Facebook.
That's pretty good. That's good. So going back to some of your experiences, I know the position that you ended up filling at OIF ended up being codified as the JACCE. So what big experiences did you take away from trying to bring in, hey, this is the airman's perspective in that position, into a joint fight?
Well, let me start first of all with how I got there.
Okay.
I'd
I love
been-
war stories, so that's why we're
Well,
here.
I was in the Pentagon, so it was war of a different kind. In the Pentagon on September 11th, and I'd been in the Pentagon in the same job as the Director of Operational Requirements for the Air Force for 3 years as we approached OIF. And General Mosley, who was the 9th Air Force Commander, CENTAF, and the Air Component Commander for OIF, called me up in an unexpected phone call and said, Fig, I need you to go be my guy with the Army during what we think is going to be an invasion. And I really did say, hey, I'll be a human shield. I'll be a POW. Just get me out of the Pentagon. So he did. But, I mean, my marching orders were that non-specific. I need you to ensure that General Dave McKiernan, the land component commander, and I are communicating in sync, reduce the friction between the components. And I knew the Army because I'd taught at CGSC, I'd been at FAC-ALO, I had been the Deputy J3 in U.S. Forces Korea, which is, there's a lot more Army than anything else in that job. So he said, pick the people you need and go do it. As I picked the people I needed, I went across domains. Okay, I picked a space guy that worked for me, brilliant young major at the time. I picked a Huey pilot from the Air Force, not because of his domain, but because of his ability to make organizations work better. He'd been my ops group deputy at Langley. I picked an A-10 guy. I picked a lot. I covered the domains, the subdomains, if you will, of air and space, and the sub-disciplines of air power. And we got about 12 people. I think we added 4 more, including coalition people, when we got there. And the whole purpose of having the ACE, now JACE, there was to eliminate friction and misunderstanding. I didn't have authorities per se. I was just there to pick up the phone and call somebody at PSAB in the air component and say, dudes, here's what the land component thinks they're going to do, be ready for it, or tell them not to, tell them that won't work, kind of thing. Or to raise my hand in meetings and say, first of all, you're wrong, and secondly, that's a dumb idea. Or, and it wasn't always that, here's how we can help from the air component. I'll give a specific example that I think's important. 2 days before the invasion, General McKiernan, who I have tremendous respect for, he's a really fine combat leader, brought in all of his subordinate commanders, the division commanders, 5th Corps commander, and key leaders from the staff. And we went into a warehouse in Kuwait that had a huge sand table depicting all of Iraq with, with the elevation features and all that. First thing that dawned on me was, it's a pretty big country compared to where we've been fighting. It's about the size of California, I think. Compared to my most recent combat experience in Serbia. It's a big country. Size matters. And I had been in this warehouse before, so had thought about that. And thus I had, I'll say 3, it might have been 5 quarters in my pocket.
Mhm.
Why did I have it? Because I knew the tendency of the Army, and really of a lot of military people, to be overly affectionate to RPA provided
Mhm.
intel, imagery, predator porn, if
Yep.
you will. And they love it, and
Yeah.
they overvalue it, and they over expect goodness from it. So one of the division commanders, I won't name because I don't remember which one, frankly, was walking through exactly what the Umpty-Ump division would be doing, and yeah, I'm still lieutenant, so I'm doing whatever. It was good, it was professional, but he began talking about what he would get from UAV video. And it was ridiculous expectations, ridiculous. So I stood up and walked out and said, hey, name. One of the great things of the ACE role was I was a 2-star. Everybody except McKiernan and the corps commander were 2-stars, so I was truly a peer, and
Yep.
that matters. You can't send a major to be a JACCE to a 2-star
It
commander.
just doesn't culturally work with
It
the
doesn't
Army.
work with anybody. You know, you got to be a peer. So I walked out and said, hey, that's all very interesting. And I took out however many quarters I had. I think it was 3 Predators that we had at the outset. It might have been 5. And flipped these out on this huge sand table. Everybody, you know, what's that about? I said, that's your Predator coverage at the most. That's it. All of them are airborne, and all of them are transmitting down. That's all you've got in these quarters on this huge sand table.
Visual.
Nice.
And that was
Yeah.
kind of my job in terms of influencing them. And there was another job that we had in terms of informing them and keeping them apprised of where we were in our creating our effects. And again, I have tremendous respect for David McKiernan. Our interaction would always start with, Fig, how's the Air Force doing? And he meant the Joint Air Power Team, but he was, Fig, how's the Air Force doing? First day or two, my answer was fine, and that wasn't sufficient. And he pressed me for a little more information, but he was not a micromanager, and he didn't want to, he just wanted a sense of the effects that air power was having, and we kind of struggled with how do we convey that without getting into we flew 623 sorties to this area and 28%, whatever. You know. So we didn't want to be too macro or too micro. And if you haven't been in combat yet, eSchool listeners, readers, watchers, whatever, you get pretty busy.
Yeah,
right?
you do.
It's kind of busy and time's very precious. So the question was, how do you convey the effects in a meaningful way that doesn't waste his time or our time gathering data, et cetera? And I had a very smart Air Force major, fighter pilot. I realize that's contradictory to most of you. He was a smart fighter pilot, kind of a geek. And we had a good relationship with, I think the name of NGA at the time was NEMA, I think.
Okay.
But anyway, the geospatial intelligence folks. And what we wound up doing was creating a very simple, technically, solution where using an Excel spreadsheet of the day's BDA and the collected BDA, we would put dots on a Falcon view map that were different colors for whether the mission was effective, partially effective, aborted, weather canceled. And that map was populated, and you could, of course, zoom out and get a pretty granular look at it. And if you had nothing better to do, you could put a cursor on the dot and go, oh, that foreship canceled. Well, that's interesting. Or they blew the ever-living crap out of the whatever Republican Guards. but it gave a graphic picture. You know, General McKiernan wanted to know, hey, if we prepped the battlefield, what kind of effect have we had on the name of
Yep.
Iraqi unit or choke point or whatever? And with that, he could very easily get just enough news he could use. So that, you know, that's where we informed and be realistic about what you're going to get from UAVs is where we influenced. And I have another event, so when I look at my watch, I realize that's good.
It's all right. We've been keeping track too.
Okay.
Maybe next interview I'll have to put a clock on the wall so it helps a little bit. Guys, do you have any just open questions?
If I was going to ask any open questions, it'd be directed more for our mid-level captains. And this one should be very, very big picture is, as a mid-level captain about to start moving up towards the major FGO world, what are some of the lessons that you've learned that a captain should take away about leadership and maybe some concepts of command?
Wow. How much time do we have?
Small question.
Yeah,
We've
small
got
question.
18 minutes before I have to
So,
pick you out.
so I
sir.
did an interview for a leadership book. Retired Army Colonel and his Air Force Major's son interviewed me in Hawaii. I don't know if they'll ever write the book, but it was a long, kind of wide-ranging discussion, not unlike this. And I'll paraphrase since this is being recorded. My response, they said, if we asked people who worked for you what you said to them that was most important, influential, consistent, people who work for you when you were an Air Force fighter pilot, what would it be? And I said, well, that's easy. It'd be shut up. Shut up. Now, there were other words
Yep.
in my answer at the time, but and that sounds really negative and demeaning and authoritarian. It's not that. If you got something to say, make sure it's worth saying. Otherwise, do your job. And I kind of got scolded as a brand new one-star in the Pentagon. My boss, the Air Force XO A3 now, I think we call him, said, hey, why didn't you say anything at that meeting with the chief? Sir, I didn't have anything to say. That's a good reason, right?
Yep.
Well, you need to speak up. And, sir, I'm sorry. But I don't do color commentary. I guess I'm doing color commentary now. But focus on your job and make sure that what you say contributes to whatever the discussion is. And don't feel you have to highlight yourself as awesome, because I'm sure you're awesome.
Well, you're in the Air Force.
Yeah,
so
you're awesome.
See?
Yeah. And the talent in the Air Force is, in fact, awesome. And I'm very proud of my association with our great Air Force. But the next thing I'd say is something I said to an OTS graduation yesterday. I had a young kid I've been a mentor to, became a second lieutenant. And I gave them 5 lessons. I think they're relevant, so let me quickly go through those.
Sure.
I didn't expect to. The first was be yourself, all right? Because everybody else is already taken. And whoever you are, however you are, got you to being a mid-level captain. It's also going to get you to being whatever you're going to be. And you're going to modify, you're going to learn, you're going to have experience, but don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to fit somebody else's idea of what you should be for 2 reasons. 1, it won't make you happy. And 2, people know when you're faking and they don't like it. And I'm sure the audience has seen people put on airs as they become the name a rank, name a role. So be yourself. The second is be brave. You know, you cannot live up to our oath of office without courage. And I think about the oath of office not just when I give it. It's a really important promise. It's important because we promise to defend principles, not persons or territory. Or it's really important. You can't live up to it if you're not brave.
Yeah.
And that's not just in combat, and being brave in combat is not easy, but guess what? You signed up for it. It's in peacetime too. Do the right thing. Don't let things that shouldn't happen. Speak up, make the tough decisions, discipline airmen when they need discipline. You know, be brave. Work your ass off. Can I say that
Yes.
in eSchool? Okay, so that's the third thing. Have a good work ethic. The best compliment I ever got as a vice president for a major defense company, I'd say a vice president's kind of like a one-star, maybe 1.5-star job. Pays way better though. I went to meet some program managers at an office I'd never been to in a place that I was visiting for the first time. And the program manager I was working with introduced me this way. She said, hey folks, this is Fig Leaf. You know, he's a VP from Virginia, and he's just like all the other vice presidents, except he does actual work. Okay? Work your ass off. You owe it to your people. And nothing's more frustrating, than a worker or a leader who phones it in. You're going to have subordinates who phone it in, but a lead, God, that's just horribly frustrating. Be yourself, be brave, work your ass off. The next thing is bidirectional respect. And when I see people who fail as leaders and fail gloriously, it's generally because they have unidirectional respect. They either love their people too much or love their bosses too much. So respect those above you, even if you don't like them, equally, and respect the people below you as much, and give it equal value. And my last two jobs were as the Vice Commander of Air Force Space Command, and then as the Deputy at Pacific Command, now Indo-Asia Pacific Command, or Indo, whatever it is. And you're really an intermediary between the staff and the four-star boss in both of those roles. And you can't play favorites. You got to take care of the boss's bidding, but you also have to take care of the folks and enable their success. You're a screen. You can guess what kind of screen. But you're, it's bi-directional. You got to work both problems. And the last thing I'd say, that will carry you through your maturation from company grade leader to field grade leader to whatever level you have fun, would you?
Yeah.
I mean, being in this Air Force, in this country, should be a joyous endeavor, right?
Yeah.
And nobody wants to come to work where the boss looks like somebody shot his puppy in the head every day, you know? So if you're going to be a leader, here's the dealio: you don't get to have a bad day. Sorry. You can, just don't do it at work.
Right.
And you don't get to pass things through this screen that I previously mentioned down to your folks. Because it doesn't help. It's not the right thing to do. I was the commander of a fighter squadron. Well, I will mention it, the world famous, highly respected Triple Nickel, America's greatest fighter squadron, and don't you forget it. But I went into a pretty negative climate, morale environment, etc. And I wanted to change that, obviously, as the new squadron commander. And so I had a mantra that I'd find a way to work in the conversation every day. I would say facetiously, I hate my miserable life. And then say, we're flying the greatest airplane, the F-15 Eagle, in the greatest squadron, in Arizona. And so it was or I work with these great airmen, and they're doing wonderful things. I hate my miserable life. And the point was, say, our lives are pretty good every day. And even when I get my butt chewed by the wing commander, I did. Only got fired once and didn't take. But that's another story. I wouldn't start truly hating my miserable life, and if I did, I wouldn't share that with the squadron. When I got to Aviano as the wing commander, having learned that lesson as a squadron commander, my opening talk to the troops, Aviano was interesting, very dispersed base, no family housing on base, etc. So it was hard to get everybody together, and I think I had 3 sessions to talk to everybody. So I would open my initial remarks by saying, hey, guess what? I'm a brand new one-star. I'm flying the F-16 in northern Italy. Everywhere I go, I have a parking spot. I live in a villa, for Pete's sake. It doesn't suck to be me. That's a big part of my job, is to make sure it doesn't suck to be you either. And people remember that.
It's a
So,
great way to look at it. Well, I think with all that, unfortunately, Fig, we've got to call it quits because
yeah,
we've
I'll
got
be
something
back
else.
like a bad penny.
Well, I hope you get to be back and join us again for another round in the squadron.
Hey, it's a pleasure. I owe so much to the Air Force, and so do you all, by the way. You give a lot, but you owe so much. And every time somebody thanks me for my service, my response is invariably, I got more than I gave. And so I'm trying to give back.
Awesome. Thanks very much, sir.
Pleasure.
And we'll see you again next time.
Warren.